The sun was sinking low over the rugged town of Dustwater Ridge, painting the sky in streaks of crimson and gold. Folks had gathered in the main square that evening, not for a fair, not for a sermon, but for something far darker. On a rickety wooden platform stood a trembling young widow, clutching her baby boy to her chest as if her arms alone could shield him from the cruelty of the world. Her name was Clara Dawson, and today she wasn't being offered help. She was being auctioned. The townsfolk whispered among themselves, some ashamed, others curious, and a few eager to bid. The auctioneer called out the price like he was selling a sack of grain instead of a woman and her child. And just when it seemed no mercy was left in that dusty town, the sound of hooves echoed through the silence. A lone rider, coat tattered and eyes like storm clouds, reined in his horse at the edge of the crowd. He dismounted slowly, dust swirling around his boots, and said in a calm, steady voice, "I'll take them both." Before we ride any further into this story, take a moment to show some love. Hit that like button. Share this video with someone who enjoys heartfelt stories from the Old West. And subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next tale from the frontier. And tell me in the comments, from which part of the world are you watching today? It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. All right then, saddle up, let's begin. The year was 1877, and Dustwater Ridge, a small frontier town tucked deep in the Montana Territory, had seen its fair share of hardship. But nothing quite like this. Clara Dawson stood on the weathered platform with her 6-month-old son Thomas, wrapped tightly in a faded blanket. The sheriff's deputy read aloud the debt left behind by her late husband, a debt the local banker claimed could only be settled by auctioning the widow and child to the highest bidder. Clara's eyes darted. Across the crowd, some faces turned away in shame, others stared in cold silence. A few men even smirked, seeing her desperation as opportunity. Her heart pounded as the auctioneer's gavel slammed against the wood.
$50 for the woman and child!
He shouted, her breath caught. She could barely stand from fear, yet she held Thomas closer, whispering, "Mama's here, sweetheart." Mama's here. The bids came slow at first, 60, then 70, until a burly miner raised his hand. 85, he barked. His tone was cruel, his grin worse. The air thickened. Just as the auctioneer opened his mouth to close the sale, a deep voice rose from the back. 100. The crowd turned. A man on horseback was dismounting, a tall, dust-covered rider with a steady gaze and a voice that carried quiet authority. His name, though no one there yet knew it, was Jonas Reed. "I'll pay the debt," he said, pulling a small leather pouch from his coat. "Every cent of it." The auctioneer hesitated. But when Jonas dropped the gold coins on the table, "The deal was done, sold," the man muttered, his voice uneasy. And just like that, Clara Dawson's fate changed, bought not by greed but by a stranger's sense of honor. As the crowd dispersed, Clara stood frozen on that old platform, her mind spinning faster than the wind that swept through Dustwater Ridge. The stranger, Jonas Reed, stepped forward, removing his hat respectfully. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you and your boy don't belong up here. Let's get you down." His voice wasn't demanding, nor pitying, just calm, solid, like the sound of boots on firm ground. Clara hesitated, her instincts torn between fear and faint hope. But when she looked into his eyes, tired, yes, but honest, she found enough courage to take his offered hand. He helped her down gently, like she was made of glass. Why did you do this?" she whispered. Jonas looked around at the people, pretending not to watch. "Because someone had to," he said simply. "You deserve better than to be treated like a ledger entry." Clara didn't respond. Words seemed too small for what had just happened. He led her to a nearby boarding house, a weathered building with peeling white paint and the smell of coffee and dust. The keeper, Mrs. Abernathy, raised an eyebrow at the sight of a soaked cowboy carrying a widow and her baby through her door, but said nothing when Jonas requested a room. "I'll pay for both," he told her, dropping more coins on the counter. "We're full," Mrs. Abernathy said, "but I can spare a cot in the storeroom." Jonas nodded. "That'll do. Mrs. Dawson can take my room." Clara's eyes widened. "No, I can't take your bed." "You can," he said simply, "and you will." "I'll sleep just fine on the floor." Inside the small room, Clara sat on the edge of the bed, rocking Thomas gently. Jonas remained by the door, hat in hand, his presence large but unthreatening. "You said you knew my husband," she began. Jonas nodded. Ethan Dawson and I rode together during the war. Good man. Saved my life once. Clara's eyes softened, but then filled with tears. He was a good man, she whispered. But gambling, drink. They took more from him than the war ever did. When he passed, I didn't know how deep the debts ran. Jonas said nothing for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. Then we'll start over. You and the boy, you'll come with me to my ranch up near Red Mesa Creek. It's quiet there, safe. She looked up sharply. And what do you want in return? Jonas's lips curved in a faint smile. Not a thing. I owe Ethan. This is me paying that debt. Clara wanted to argue, but her exhaustion won out. She nodded slowly, whispering a quiet, "Thank you." That night, while Thomas slept soundly beside her, Clara lay awake listening to the creak of the old floorboards and the soft murmur of voices downstairs. The events of the day replayed in her mind, the horror of the auction, the unexpected kindness of the stranger, and somewhere deep inside, where fear had lived for months, a fragile spark of hope began to glow. Morning came with the golden wash of sunlight spilling through the curtains. Jonas was already downstairs talking with Mrs. Abernathy and packing supplies. When Clara appeared with Thomas in her arms, he looked up and smiled slightly. "Morning, ma'am," he said. "Hope you don't mind traveling by wagon. It's a bit rough, but easier with the boy." Clara managed a small smile. "I don't mind." Jonas helped her climb aboard, then took the reins and set the horses moving. The town of Dustwater Ridge faded behind them, its crooked rooftops and judgmental eyes shrinking into the distance. For the first time in months, Clara breathed freely. The wind smelled of pine and dust, not dead and despair. As the wagon rolled along, Jonas spoke little. But in the silence there was comfort. He drove with steady hands, his gaze fixed on the horizon, while Clara watched Thomas sleeping peacefully in her arms. After several miles, she finally asked, "Why did you really come for us?" Jonas kept his eyes on the road. "Someone in town told me what was happening. I figured no decent man could ride past knowing a woman and child were about to be sold." She studied his profile, lined, rugged, yet strangely kind. "You're not like most men," she said softly. He gave a small, humorless laugh. "That's what they tell me." The wagon creaked onward across the vast plains. Two lost souls bound together by fate and a debt of honor neither had expected to collect. By nightfall, they reached the edge of the wilderness, where the open land met the rolling hills of Montana's untamed heart. There, under a wide canvas of stars, began a journey neither of them could have imagined. The trail wound through wide stretches of open prairie and dense patches of pine, the kind of country that could humble even the strongest soul. For Clara Dawson, it was both terrifying and freeing, the road ahead uncertain, but at least it was hers to travel. Jonas Reed drove the wagon with steady hands, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried weight, the kind of calm certainty that comes from a man who'd seen enough of life to know when silence says more than talk ever could. By the second day, the town was far behind them. The world had turned to wide skies and endless earth. Clara found herself watching Jonas when he wasn't looking. The way he handled the horses with quiet control, the way he checked on Thomas every so often, making sure the baby was warm and fed before he worried about himself. When they stopped near a stream for a midday rest, Jonas handed her a canteen. "The water's clean here," he said. "Cold as a mountain spring. Good for you and the boy." "Thank you," Clara replied, her voice soft but sincere. She hesitated, then added, "You seem to know these lands well." Jonas gave a small nod. "Been drifting across them near 10 years. Worked cattle, drove freight, broke horses when I could. Settled out this way after the war. Do you ever miss home?" she asked. He gave a faint smile. "Home's wherever the horse stops and the fire keeps burning." Something about that answer struck Clara, the loneliness behind it. She knew what it meant to lose a home, to stand in a place once full of laughter and find only silence. As she fed Thomas, Jonas kept to the edge of the camp, giving her privacy but staying close enough to guard against trouble. When the baby finished, Clara caught Jonas watching quietly. Their eyes met, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them. Understanding, gratitude, and perhaps the first fragile thread of trust. They made camp that night beneath a sky crowded with stars. Jonas gathered kindling while Clara set out a blanket for Thomas, who cooed happily, fascinated by the flicker of firelight. "You've got a strong boy there," Jonas said, stirring the embers. "He has his father's eyes," Clara replied softly. "I just hope he won't have his father's troubles." Jonas didn't press her, but she continued anyway, maybe because the quiet, crackling fire made it easier to speak. "Ethan used to be a good man, brave, but after the war, something in him broke. He started gambling, drinking. I told myself he'd change once the baby came, but it only got worse. When he fell ill, there was nothing left. No money, no friends, just debts." Her voice wavered. "They said I was part of that debt. Imagine that, being sold like a horse." Jonas's jaw tightened. "There's no justice in that. Only men without decency." Clara gave a weary smile. "You speak like a preacher," he chuckled low. "Haven't darkened a church door in years. But I reckon a man doesn't need scripture to know right from wrong." She looked at him then, really looked, and realized that beneath the rough exterior and the scars of time was a man carved by honor, not pride. "Do you ever get lonely?" she asked suddenly. He glanced into the flames. "Every day. But it's easier than losing people you care about." Clara understood that too well. The fire popped, sending sparks into the night. "Maybe loneliness isn't the only way to keep from hurting," she murmured. But Jonas didn't answer. Still, she saw the flicker of emotion in his eyes before he turned away. The next afternoon, storm clouds rolled across the plains. Jonas eyed the sky with concern. "Storm's coming fast," he warned. "We'll take shelter soon." By the time the first raindrops hit, they'd found an old line shack, half-rotted but still standing. Jonas secured the horses, then ushered Clara and Thomas inside. The roof creaked under the force of wind, but it held. As lightning split the sky outside, Clara tended to Thomas while Jonas worked to start a fire. His shirt was soaked through, and she noticed the way his hands trembled from the cold. Without a word, she handed him a dry blanket from the wagon. "Here," she said. "You'll catch your death if you don't warm up." Jonas gave a faint nod. "Thank you." They sat by the fire as thunder rolled like distant cannon fire. The flickering light painted soft lines across his face, strong but worn, like the land itself. When Thomas fussed, Jonas hesitated, then said awkwardly, "May I?" Clara blinked in surprise but nodded. She guided his large calloused hands as he took the baby. Jonas held him stiffly at first, unsure, but Thomas only stared up at him, wide-eyed and curious. After a few seconds, Jonas's grip relaxed. He smiled, a rare gentle smile that reached his eyes. "Hello there, little man," he murmured. Clara couldn't help but smile too. "Seems he likes you." "Doesn't take much," Jonas said, chuckling softly. "I've always had a way with horses. Maybe babies ain't so different." She laughed for the first time in months, a quiet, genuine laugh that filled the shack with warmth stronger than the fire. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, two weary souls and a child found a small, impossible peace. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean. Jonas was already up tending to the horses when Clara awoke. He turned as she stepped outside, Thomas still half asleep in her arms. "Coffee's hot," he said. "Thank you," she replied, taking the tin cup he offered. They stood side by side in the crisp morning air, the mountains in the distance glowing pink beneath the rising sun. For a long time, neither spoke. They didn't need to. Finally, Clara broke the silence. "You could have left me there, you know. Rode on and never looked back." "Why didn't you?" Jonas took a slow breath. "Your husband saved my life once." "But that's not why." She turned to him, curious. "I've seen too much cruelty out here," he continued. "Men forgetting what it means to do right. Maybe I was just trying to remind myself that decency still counts for something." Clara studied him for a long moment. "You think saving me was about decency?" Jonas met her gaze. "No, I think it was about fate." The words hung between them like the morning mist. Fragile, uncertain but full of possibility. That evening, they reached the first sight of Jonas's land, a narrow valley cradled between pines and ridges, with a creek winding through it like a silver thread. Smoke curled from the chimney of a small cabin ahead. "This is it," Jonas said, pride softening his tone. "Reed Ranch. It ain't much, but it's home." Clara stared in quiet awe. After all the pain, the humiliation, and the fear, this simple place felt like salvation. As they rolled to a stop, Jonas helped her down from the wagon. His hand lingered a moment longer than necessary, and she didn't pull away. He showed her inside, the rough timber walls, the stone hearth, the sturdy table he'd built with his own hands. "You and the boy can take the room and back," he said. "I'll stay in the loft. Jonas," she began, her voice soft. "You've done more for me than anyone has since my husband died." "I don't know how to thank you." "You already did," he said simply. "You trusted me." That night, as the fire crackled in the hearth and Thomas slept peacefully nearby, Clara lay awake thinking about the man who had saved her. A man who asked for nothing but gave everything that mattered. And somewhere deep inside, she realized that the fear she'd carried for so long, of men, of life, of the world, had begun to fade. What replaced it wasn't yet love. But it was something close, something steady, growing quietly like roots beneath hard ground. Life at Reed Ranch soon settled into a quiet rhythm, one built on the soft sounds of wind through the pines, the steady creak of a rocking chair, and the distant lowing of cattle in the hills. Each morning, Jonas was up before sunrise, tending to the herd or mending fences. Clara learned to cook over his old iron stove, to sweep the cabin clean, and to hang laundry on a line strung between two cottonwoods. It was simple work, honest work, and for the first time in a long while, she felt useful again. Little Thomas thrived in the mountain air. His cheeks grew rosy, his eyes bright. Jonas had built him a small wooden pen to play in while Clara worked, and when he wasn't in the saddle, the cowboy could often be found crouched beside the boy, carving him toys with that quiet patience only true kindness allows. At first, Clara told herself the arrangement was temporary. Jonas had said as much. She could stay until she figured out what to do next. But weeks passed, and the idea of leaving began to feel like tearing out a piece of her own heart. One crisp morning, as the sun broke over the ridge, Jonas leaned against the corral fence, watching Clara hang a wash of linens that shimmered white in the golden light. He didn't realize he was smiling until she turned and caught him. "You're staring," she teased, a hint of laughter in her voice. "Just admiring hard work," he replied with mock seriousness. "Those sheets are straighter than any fence I ever built." She laughed softly, a sound that had become his favorite part of the day. That evening, while Clara prepared supper, Jonas entered with an idea. "There's a festival in Cedar Bluff next Saturday, Founders Day. Folks from all over the valley come for music, dancing, food. Thought maybe you'd like to go." She blinked in surprise. "Me? You've been cooped up here for weeks. Might do you good to see friendly faces." Her smile faltered slightly. "I don't know, Jonas. I'm not exactly used to crowds anymore." He shrugged lightly. "You won't be alone." "I'll be there." Something in the way he said it, steady, certain, made her heart skip. "All right," she said after a moment. "It might be nice." The following week they rode into Cedar Bluff, a lively little town dressed in bunting and music. For Clara, it felt like stepping into another world. Laughter, fiddles, the scent of roasted corn and sweet pies filling the air. Thomas rode in her arms, wide-eyed at the noise and color. Jonas guided her gently through the crowd, introducing her to familiar faces. The blacksmith, the sheriff, the general store owner. Every man and woman greeted Jonas with respect, and Clara soon realized that his quiet reputation stretched far beyond the boundaries of his land. When a lively tune struck up, Jonas glanced toward her, hesitating. "Would you care to dance?" he asked, as though afraid she'd laugh. Clara bit her lip, her cheeks warm. "It's been years. Then we'll both be rusty." She placed her hand in his, and for a moment the world around them disappeared. They moved in slow rhythm, the dust swirling beneath their boots, the laughter and music fading into something distant. When the song ended, their hands lingered, neither willing to let go first. Before she could speak, a woman's voice broke through the crowd. "Well, I'll be." Jonas Reed at a dance hall. Must be snowing in July. A blonde woman in a fine blue dress approached, smiling with the confidence of someone used to attention. "Rebecca Turner," she introduced herself to Clara. "Jonas and I—" "Go back a ways." Jonas cleared his throat. "Rebecca's father owns the lumber mill," he said, avoiding the woman's eyes. "Oh, he does more than that," Rebecca said with a playful smile. "We were nearly engaged once, before this one decided he loved his solitude more than me." Clara felt her stomach twist. She forced a polite smile. It's nice to meet you. Rebecca's gaze swept over Clara's simple calico dress, then to the baby in her arms. And you are? Clara Dawson, Jonas answered quickly. She's staying at my ranch for a time. Rebecca's brow arched. Is that so? How charitable of you, Jonas. Something sharp flashed in Clara's chest. Embarrassment, maybe even anger. But Jonas's expression didn't change. Enjoy the evening, Rebecca, he said firmly, turning away. They found a quiet corner near the bonfire, and for a while neither spoke. The music drifted around them, warm and bright, but Clara couldn't shake the sting of Rebecca's words. Finally, Jonas said softly, "She doesn't mean anything by it. Rebecca likes to stir trouble when she's bored." Clara looked down at Thomas, who had fallen asleep in her arms. "You don't owe me an explanation, Jonas. You've been nothing but kind." "I'm just a guest." He turned toward her, his eyes steady. "You're more than that, Clara." The words struck her like a heartbeat. For a moment she thought he might say more, but the music ended, and the moment broke like glass underfoot. The ride home was quiet. The moon hung full above the valley, lighting their path. Clara watched Jonas from the corner of her eye, the strong line of his jaw, the way his hand rested easy on the reins. Finally, she said, "You didn't have to stand up for me back there." "I didn't do it out of duty," he replied. "I did it because I wanted to." Clara felt her breath catch, but before she could answer, Thomas stirred in her arms, letting out a sleepy cry. The spell was gone as quickly as it had come. When they reached the ranch, Jonas helped her down from the wagon. His hands lingered a moment longer than necessary, rough against the soft fabric of her sleeve. "Good night, Clara," he said quietly. "Good night, Jonas," she replied, her voice barely more than a whisper, inside as she laid Thomas in his cradle. Clara couldn't shake the image of Jonas's eyes in the moonlight, gentle, steady, and filled with something she hadn't seen in a long time, something she wasn't sure she dared to name. The next morning the world looked the same, yet somehow everything had changed. Clara found herself humming while she cooked, smiling at nothing in particular. Jonas, too, seemed quieter than usual, though his glances lingered a heartbeat too long. Whatever unspoken thing had passed between them at the dance still hung in the air, fragile but real. It would take only one moment of courage to bring it into the open, and that moment was coming, sooner than either of them could have guessed. The morning after the festival dawned cool and quiet, the air carrying that crisp edge that signaled autumn's approach. The mountain ridges glowed with a soft gold haze, and for Clara Dawson, Reed Ranch had never looked more peaceful. But peace can be fragile on the frontier. Jonas had ridden out early to check the northern fence line, promising to be back by sundown. When dusk came and the sun dipped behind the ridge, there was still no sign of him. By the time the lanterns were lit, worry clawed at Clara's chest. She told herself he was fine, that he'd simply been delayed. But the night air grew colder, and fear began to whisper old stories in her mind. She looked at little Thomas sleeping soundly in his crib, and knew she couldn't just sit and wait. Clutching her shawl around her shoulders, Clara saddled Jonas's gentle mare, Willow, by the light of the lantern. Her hands shook as she fastened the straps. She'd only been riding a few weeks, but determination steadied her better than any training ever could. With Thomas bundled close against her, she rode out into the night. The wind howled across the plains. The moon hung low, painting the land silver and strange. After a mile or two, Clara heard the faint echo of hooves ahead and a familiar voice calling through the dark. "Clara?" Her heart leapt. She pulled the reins sharply, and there he was, Jonas Reed, mud-streaked but whole, a lantern swinging from his hand. "What in heaven's name are you doing out here?" he said, disbelief and concern mixing in his voice. "You didn't come back," she said breathlessly. "I was afraid something had happened." Jonas stared at her, at the woman who'd once been trembling on an auction block, now riding through the night alone with a baby on her chest. His expression softened. "You rode out here for me?" "I couldn't just sit and do nothing." He reached out, steadying Willow's bridle. "You're braver than any man I ever rode with," he said quietly. The words hit her deeper than she expected. When they returned to the cabin, Jonas took Thomas gently from her arms and settled him beside the fire. "You shouldn't have done that," he said softly, "but—" "Thank you." Clara looked at him, her fear finally breaking into relief. "You matter to me, Jonas. You saved my life. my son's life. You must know that by now. He stared into the fire for a long moment, then turned to her. I didn't save you, Clara. You saved me. I didn't even know how lonely I was until you and that little boy came along. Her eyes filled with tears. Jonas! He stepped closer, his hand brushing her cheek, rough but gentle. I'm not much of a talker, he said, voice low. Never have been. But I know what I feel when I see you, and I don't want you to ever feel like you owe me anything. I just want you here. Both of you. Clara's breath caught. For months she'd fought against hope, against trusting anyone again. But standing there in the quiet warmth of the firelight, she realized she didn't need to fight anymore. She reached up, her fingers trembling as they found his. You already have us, she whispered. Jonas smiled, a small, honest smile that carried more love than words ever could. He pulled her gently into his arms, and for the first time in a long while, neither of them felt alone. Outside, the wind eased, and the pines whispered softly, as if the land itself approved. And that's how the story of Jonas Reed and Clara Dawson began. Not with riches or promises, but with courage, kindness, and a simple act of decency that changed two lives forever. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Tell me what part touched your heart the most, and from which part of the world you're watching. Your support keeps these stories alive, and this storyteller riding down the next dusty trail to bring you another tale from the old frontier. Until then, stay kind, stay brave, and remember, sometimes salvation rides in on a tired horse and a stranger's heart.